Hi, I'm here in Kenya with Trinnie, who owns a farm in the elephant corridor. So Trinnie, can you tell us a little bit about the elephant corridor?
Yeah, sure. So the elephant corridor was designed by a few stakeholders, Lewa, Kasima, Maranya and myself and Ngarrindari Forest, to allow wildlife to have a route to go from the Mount Kenya National Park all the way down to the northern conservancies and national park without having to go into the farmers' fields and destroying crops. So it was designed to help alleviate wildlife-human conflict. And I just happened to be walking around here looking for a farm, and I was lucky enough to find this one. And later I was told it was going to go into the corridor. So, well, the corridor was going to pass me actually. So then I negotiated for it to go round me instead of to pass me. So this farm is in the widest part of the corridor. And when I got here, it was a devastated piece of land. And so I knew when I saw it that it was an area for natural beauty, and I thought, wildlife, natural beauty, we're going to have to do some environmental restoration here. And so I kind of had a plan, and now 10 years later, we can see that the elephants are coming up. We have 13 species of wildlife here now.
Wow.
And we even have African wild dog. And they come right into the garden sometimes. And we also have forest cover where there was none. So we've planted 67,650 trees, of which the community have been the people who have actually done it. They've been paid to do it on a contract basis, and the trees have been bought from a women's tree planting group. And so I particularly like to use them because then they teach other people how to germinate seed and to, grow trees. And they also have another type of income.
And so why did you choose this particular spot?
Well, it just happened, this particular spot. I had been looking all around Kenya. I was working on Lewa Conservancy, but in agriculture, not in wildlife. And I had always dreamt of having a ranch. And I knew finally, of course, I wasn't ever going to have a wildlife ranch. But when I heard that this place was going to be a corridor was going to go past it, I decided, yes, I'm going to buy this. And so when I found out about this piece of land, I came actually because I was going to start a flower farm here with somebody. And then that didn't work out because of the topography of this farm, because it's 3 hills and 3 valleys and very rocky, and we couldn't put greenhouses up here, and there was no water. So that was, but I knew when I saw it that I was going to do an environmental restoration project and have wildlife. And the flower farm guy, although he's a millionaire now down the road with his flower farm, went out the door, and I have a better view.
So what kind of projects do you do here?
So what we do here mostly, so tree planting, honey, so honey production, because now we've planted all these trees, we're getting a bit of diversity, and we're getting a lot of flowers, like Highland bush, and so we're getting a very good quality honey here.
Yes.
And we do some hay baling, not very much, but it's sort of, the hay baling pays the salaries, just off that 2 acres. And we do some small amount of fish farming. The fish came in because I had to put in a reservoir to have some water security. And then, now I do an Airbnb, so I've got another sort of entrepreneurial project going on.
So, you don't use any plastic here at this farm, do you? No?
Well, we try not to use plastic. It's quite difficult. But luckily with the ban on plastic bags in Kenya, that's really helpful. Now we've moved to sort of buckets and things, using plastic that can be used multiple times. Yeah. But I don't allow, people can bring plastic, but they have to take it away. Yeah, and myself, I also take my plastic away. So because it's a conservation area and I really want to keep it pristine, so plastic for me is really an important thing that we've got to all give up. All of us, everywhere in the world, is my personal feeling.
Yeah.
And find alternatives.
So you do bee things here?
Yeah, we do beekeeping. And so there's a team of 3 of us. We have about 50 hives at the moment. And we basically we check the hives once a month. Okay, because bees, like anything you do, you have to look at the hygiene of your hives. And you can imagine with the bush and the insect life, we can also get other predators who also want honey, and it could be a wax moth who wants the wax, or it could be a baboon who wants the honey, or it could be a little black ant which wants the honey. So we check once a month, and if we see the frames are ready and they've been capped by the bee, so capping means that the bee has prepared the frames so that they're ready, so that they're full of honey, and so we take the ones that have been properly capped, and then we extract from those.
So how does your bee boxes work?
So we use Langstroth hives, which are divided into 2. So the colony, or the queen box, is at the bottom, and in the centre of that there's a net which stops the queen going up to the top, but it's got holes big enough so the workers can go up to the top with the drones. And then it has another layer, a box on top with between 10 and 12 frames, and that's where the bees put the honey. And so when we harvest, we are able to take the frames from the top full of honey without hurting the population, the colony underneath.
And that's much better than a conventional beehive.
Well, it's better than the traditional log beehives that are used in Kenya, because you know when you use those log beehives, you basically, when you harvest, you have to take the whole colony out, and then they have to start all over again. So it's a big mess of wax and honey and bees, and then you know you kill the bees, you damage them. You damage the colony, so it takes a long time for them to recover if you do leave some back in there.
So what kinds of wildlife do you have here?
Well, we've got elephant coming through, we've got buffalo, we've got 4 types of antelope, so we've got the reedbuck, the bushbuck, the duiker, and we have waterbuck. We get warthog, although my warthogs have vanished for a while.
Interesting.
Because they were grazing with my sheep. I think they were happy to be in a big group so they wouldn't get grabbed by a leopard, because we've got leopard and hyena, we've got serval cat, we get wild dog coming through here, and baboons. We haven't yet had the vervets or the sykes monkeys, but I'm sure the vervets are further down actually. They do irritate the community when they're harvesting potatoes and things. But I'm sure when these trees are growing, we'll have all the monkeys, and we're hoping that we'll get some colobus back into this forest.
What's a colobus?
A colobus monkey is quite a rare monkey now in Kenya, and it's white and black, very long hair. And I think it was the Kikuus, wasn't it, George, who used it for their traditional dress.
Most African communities.
Most African communities.
As a way of celebrating the cerebral kind of cloth.
Yeah. And you don't get very many of them nowadays, because their habitats disappeared. And so, you know, to get from one habitat to another, they have to get on the ground. And as soon as they get on the ground, dogs and other things, humans, tend to kill them. So hopefully we're going to get a population one day here.
Yeah.
Because there is a population in Naramora. So when we need a population, there are some populations that do need a home. Because they're too close to humans.
And
Settlements.
I've heard that there's a special relationship between bees and elephants.
Well, what I've observed here on this shamba is that elephants, because they walk many, many kilometers, sometimes hundreds of kilometers, like one's just gone up to Somalia and come back and that was the first in many, many years. Anyway, they because they traverse all over the country where they can, they eat, and then they drop their droppings. So they drop 1 ton a week.
Wow.
That's a lot of droppings, but they're nice, moist droppings, full of seed, fertilizer. And so a seed in that dropping immediately germinates because it's got water, it's got fertilizer, and it's got a good solid thing that can start to put its roots out. And what I've noticed is those trees that it eats, bees also like. And so it's dropping trees all over the countryside that bees like. So when those trees germinate and grow, bees also like them. And so they become what I call honey trees now, and I like to plant honey trees. And I have some on the farm, George would have seen them today coming up the hill, that have been planted here by elephant in their droppings.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And do different kinds of trees produce different flavors of honey?
They do, and it's very clear, especially like, for instance, eucalyptus honey. Okay, eucalyptus is not indigenous to Kenya, but there are some eucalyptus trees that grow around in some of these areas, and they're very good honey producers. And their honey is very, very strong. And then if you come here, we get a lot of olive honey. We get all the natural bush honey, and it creams. This honey creams, whereas at the coast it's much darker. The mangroves has a very bitter taste, but it's very medicinal honey. So they, depending on the trees, like that Prunus africana tree I showed you for prostate cancer, that produces very sweet honey. Very sweet honey. And it's incredibly medicinal. But it's not sweet in the sense of, well, how can I say, there are some very sweet honeys, like, you know, if you can imagine lavender, for instance, what kind of honey do you think lavender would produce? If you know the smell of lavender, what?
It would kind of taste maybe like, it wouldn't be too sweet, but it would be flowery. I don't know how to put it.
No, I understand what you're saying. And you're quite right, it's not sweet, and it has a sort of a completely different smell.
Yeah.
So, you know, I've got friends who do lavender honey, and it's a completely different flavour to the bush honey here. My honey is quite mixed, because it just depends on what flowers, and so it comes out in different colours every time. So sometimes it might come out dark, but it always creams as a lighter colour, from white to this colour of the table. And sometimes when you harvest it, it's darker than that. Well, most of the time it's darker than what it crystallizes into, it creams into. So it's very interesting. Yeah.
So what kind of conservation work do you do here?
Conservation work, basically we're doing tree planting, mostly, indigenous trees, and letting also the indigenous bush come up that was here, you know, when this place first was created. So, you know, because it was barren, I decided to look at a tree that an elephant didn't like. Because although I wanted elephant, I had to be very careful, because I wanted the ground cover to come up, and the only way I could do that was trying to look at trees that elephant didn't like, and other animals, because antelope also don't eat cedar, and that was the only way that I could make sure that we'd actually get the trees to adult stage. Because an olive tree, you can see lots of trees around this farm have got wire around them.
Yeah.
Those ones can be eaten by everything. Elephant, the antelope, everything. And so we, you know, that cost a lot of money actually, because I wanted to put olive here. I was very much into olives because of the honey originally, and because of the wood. But they're much loved by everything except an elephant. Elephant don't eat olives.
Interesting.
Yeah. And bees love olive. So that's one tree that they don't really connect.
No.
But so cedar are the main tree that I planted here. And now you can see they're coming up, and after 10 years we've got all the other indigenous trees that you can't actually get in nurseries. There was no seed because it had all disappeared, been cut down 10, 15 years ago. And so now all of those, the Selignifolia are coming up. There's all sorts of different other indigenous trees, and which are really good for bees as well. So I'm noticing that they use them for different things. And also the different types of grasses that have come up. So we've got new trees, new types of grasses, and now we've got a diversity of bird life, insects, and wildlife. Yeah, so that's kind of the conservation. What I looked at was, well, for conservation, I wanted it to be holistic. I wanted it to be an integrated approach, where community were going to benefit, where wildlife was going to benefit, and where I was going to benefit. Like my own livelihood, because I wanted to make money out of this place in a holistic way, not in a commercial way. I could have done commercial agriculture, but I decided not to. And anyway, my contract with the Bill Woodley Trust, which is who I'm a stakeholder with on this thing, we're not allowed to do commercial. We're allowed to do a certain amount, like Casima and Marania. They can do some wheat growing in parts.
Like how you do the hay.
Like I do the hay. So they're allowed to do a small part, but they find that the elephant eat it all anyway. So, so they've given up that now.
So you involve communities, and do you do it with conservation work, or is it with beekeeping, or what?
So at the moment with communities, I'm just on the way, about to scale up. And the way, because I'm an agronomist, okay, so an agronomist is an agriculturalist. Okay, so the way I actually look at this is that beekeeping stops the use of pesticides and fungicides. And I teach conservation agriculture. So conservation agriculture means that no till.
What's a till?
No till, so no ploughing, ground cover. So that means you keep your ground covered to keep the soil in, and rotation, which means if you plant maize this year, then you've got to do beans next year, or whatever season. You change what crop you had in the ground the previous season.
And why do you do that?
Because you're depleting the fertility of the soil if you don't do that. And so all the soils in Africa are so overly, well, worldwide actually, they're so overly used with commercial agriculture. And so now I'm trying to help the communities around me increase their yields. So for instance, at the moment they might have 5 acres, yeah? And that 5 acres they'll plant maize as an example. Okay, and I'm looking at that maize, and if they do maize every single year, their yields might go from 28 bags an acre down to 5, because they're not looking after their soil. So by looking after your soil, it means you have to, so when you're planting a seed, so what I teach them is that there's a thing called a ripper, which goes, you can use a tractor and you can use commercial methods, but this ripper, instead of digging up all the land, it just makes like a line 1 foot apart, and it, just makes a line maybe that deep through the soil from one end of the field to the other. It's taken behind a tractor, and then you can just plant the seed by hand, or you can get tines now with seed. You can get planters that are called no-till, which means they're planting. They're like a needle going into the soil, dropping a seed. Okay, so then it doesn't touch the soil at all. So it keeps the structure of the soil, so that you protect your soil. Because then after that, you must try to cover it, because your insect life down there is coming up and taking the mulch and taking it down and making all the holes for the rain when it comes to go deep down. So with conservation agriculture, beekeeping is really part of that. Okay, so for instance, they will start to get higher yields because their soil will be better. Okay, and they will have, because their soil will be better, they get stronger crops, higher yields, and they have to use less input. So it brings your cost of production down. And with beekeeping, of course, it pollinates your crops so that you get good fruiting.
And what do kids need to know about conservation?
Wow. Oh, I think kids. Well, I think especially kids who live in cities, and I think times are changing now. I think they need to know that your natural resources are the most important part of your ecosystem. Even in a city, you can have, like my brother's just putting a beehive in his little tiny garden in London. Because bees travel, say, 4 kilometres. And people are planting little plants, and there's still trees even in cities, and on top of roofs people are starting to do vegetable gardens. And learning that actually it's important to have nature. It's important to look after your environment. For water, climate change, which is going to affect all of us and is affecting all of us. So for children, depending what age, I think the earlier you learn about it, the better. The earlier you learn about not wasting water, switching off lights, segregating your rubbish, the earlier you learn about it, the better. That's what I think anyway, I don't know. What do you think?
I think that too.
Yeah?
Definitely.
But lots of young people now are learning because they've seen the mess. They've inherited the mess of the previous generations. And, people are learning. And the world is changing to a better place, I believe anyway.
Thank you so much for this interview and allowing me to stay at your farm.
Pleasure.
I'm so glad that you allowed me.
Yeah, and I hope you come back.
I will,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
I will.